Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where our guests are. Today, we will have conversation with my very good friend, Andrea Bianchi. Is it correct?
It's
Uh,
perfect, Leaf.
yeah, Andrea Bianchi, who is a researcher and a consultant at newly established think tank or research center, MCC, in Brussels. I attended several of events organized by MCC, and I would like to say that these events were excellently, very well organized, with very professional panelists, and technically was very well prepared. At one of these, in fact, during the first event that I attended at MCC, I met Andrea Bianchi, who is a researcher and consultant at MCC Center, and we just talked about different subjects. And what attracted me in Andrea, that when we started speaking, which country are you from? He asked me where I am from. I said Azerbaijan. He said Ali and Nino, and I was surprised that someone from Italy uh, uh, knew about this absolutely extraordinary, Roman or whatever, excellent book. And we talked about different subjects, and the more we talked with each other, the more we found common grounds and common areas where our interests coincide. And we today our program, we mostly will talk about history, about the relations between the Ottoman Empire and Italian principalities. Firstly, Venice, Naples, Holy See in general. In the you know picture to the YouTube program today, I put Andrea photo, my photo, and between our two photos, last minute I also put the photo of Niccolo Machiavelli to make us bigger. Probably Niccolo Machiavelli doesn't need our presence to be great, but we need probably, and like it would be like conversation between three of us, because I am sure Andrea will make many references to this person, whose books are in many, well, probably in the bookshelves of all today's politicians, despite the fact that he was living in the end of the of 15th, beginning of the 16th century. But he, uh, put his great heritage in the human history and philosophy, and real power. The how power is done, how power is extended. He puts from A to Z to power. On the base of Niccolo Machiavelli book, hundreds of books were written, including 36 Laws of Power, Power and Politics. And in all these books, there is, of course, reference to this extraordinary person. Yeah. Andrea, just my first question: how did you know about Ali in the book? How did you knew about this?
Well, it's a casual story like most of our days, but at least we can try to connect the casual uh, factors we face every day in our life. So, a friend of mine working at MCC is originally from Iran, and they mentioned me this book. This book, Ali Unnino, for who is interested, is a story set in Azerbaijan at the time of the at the very beginning of the 20th century. So you can see the let's say the arrival of the First World War, the arrival of the Bolsheviks, and you can see history breaking the love story, the relationship between Ali and Nino. And Nino is a Georgian, and Ali is an Azeri boy. So I was suggested from a friend, and actually, you see, there was this nice story Yeah, here we are. The book was translated. The funny story, you know, Arif, is that the book was translated in Italian exactly on March. So for sure there were all the translations, but it was quite difficult to find them even online. And then on March, a new translation came out. So I met you and I met the book at the same time. So yeah, it was a casual meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very amazing. So that it is well known also in Iran, as you said, that if your friend from Iran presented it, so that it's also well known in Iran, because there is also Ali uncle comes from Iran to visit, and there is, you know, a transition of Azerbaijani identity. There is mixture of Iranian culture when his uncle eats with hands rice, and he compares with Nino family. They eat everything with fork, with knife, you know, and he within himself there is like battle between this Asian culture, you know, pilaf and all everything, you know, traditions, and then there is the wind of the West, and Georgia was closer because of Christianity. It was closer to the Western civilization. Yes, and Andrea, I have been in Brussels for a very long time. I came first time in '95, and I was attending many events organized by different think tanks. I was in. I had also membership to the European Policy Center, to Center for European Political Studies, Konrad Adenauer Center, and many, you know, small or medium kind of think tanks in Brussels. Brussels is, you know, center of European politics. And I've never known about MCC until recently, this year, the first time I attended. I received before invitations, but I was not thinking that it is something, you know, important. But when I came, I attended the first event. It was, as I said, very well organized, very highly attended, and also what is not least important, there were always some receptions and some good food served, and it's not something which is done by all the think tanks. Can you tell me a little bit about MCC? I know at least, but you probably can. I see that you are still in the office. Yeah, I see the background of your think tank. Can you tell me about, you know, this MCC?
Yeah, sure. MCC is an acronym which stands for Matthias Corvinus Collegium, or Collegium. So College Mattia Corvinus. Mattia Corvinus was the most important king in the history of Hungary. So in the very middle of the 15th century, King Matthias Corvinus was sovereign in today's Hungary. We may say Romania, Croatia, and his nation state expanded westwards. So it was very extended back then, and we will talk about it today. Well, MCC Brussels is, let's say, the Brussels spin-off of MCC. MCC is a pedagogical, educational enterprise in Hungary and in some Romanian cities. As some listeners would like to know, there are many Hungarian speakers and actually half Hungarians living in Romania today. This is due to the fact that after the Versailles Treaty back in 1920, Hungarian borders were deeply reduced, and many Hungarians remained in Slovakia, remained in Romania. So that's why even nowadays there are MCC structures in Romania as well. So what they try to do is like building an educational project. And we may say that in Brussels something different happened, because for sure we prepare seminars and conferences, but nevertheless at the same time we still have the educational pedagogical project in mind. Every month at least a couple of teams of young students arrive in the city, and they are guided towards the parliament. They receive lessons from us and
They're
from
mostly from Hungary. They're mostly from Hungary or from other European countries.
They are both. That's a perfect question for us because they are from Hungary and from Romania as well. But I would rather say the Carpathian Basins, which is the area where you have the Hungarian speaker, and they are extremely proud of being Hungarian. It's something we should regard with closer attention nowadays, you know, even after what happened in Donetsk and Lugansk, because Hungary is a very, very clever country. And I'm not saying this because I am
pragmatic country, very pragmatic.
Yeah, very pragmatic, as it is stuck between the West and the East. They know exactly how to deal in these circumstances. So even if there is a huge Hungarian population in Romania, they manage to go for the diplomatic way, and that's what MCC is doing as well. So delivering an educational project and putting ideology aside, especially nowadays that we have lots of ideology in Brussels, and we should face them, bringing something more concrete, something more solid, and not just a provocation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely, I see that Hungary is a Hungarian minority. I was in Ukraine like 10 years ago, and I was in the Carpathian region, and I was surprised to know that there are quite important Hungarian minority. They speak Hungarian between themselves, and they preserve their culture, and of course, recently we see that there are some also issue of minority, Hungarian minority. I know that Hungary, even before the war, was raising the issue of Hungarian minority in Ukraine. In the past, there were distribution of Hungarian passport to in these regions, which made angry Ukrainian political circles. But now I think that this issue is not anymore on the agenda. But still, I see that Hungary, bordering with that part of the Ukraine and quite complicated Balkan area, is very careful in balancing policies. For me, generally, was big discovery, not discovery, but I wouldn't say that today discovery, but maybe for the last 20 years, I see that there is also in Hungary Turkish identity, which is growing, and we see that Hungarian leaders participate at all Turkic state summits, including recent one, in developing very close relations with the Turkic countries, with Central Asian, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, of course. And for many, it is a little bit, a puzzle. Hungary, it's in Europe, but it keeps very strong Turkic links. And do you think that this Turkic identity is something new also for Hungarians? Because I don't think that like 20, 30 years ago, Hungarians thought of them like being Turkic nation. But now I see more and more people say that, yes, we are also part of this one. Of course, we know Hungars. In fact, this is Huns, Hungars tribes, which came from the Central Asia, then Ukraine, Russian, South Russia, and then they moved to the Balkans. Also, Bulgars, it's also Turkic tribe, Hungars Turkic tribe. But how it happened, as an historian, maybe you can tell a little bit about this as well.
Well, I should actually say that I have an Italian point of view on the matter. So you see, okay. I see the story as a sort of stranger. So when I talk with my Hungarian community, I see and perceive them as Italian. So as Italian, I always have some Turkish blood still in me, because we should be honest and admit that until let's see, in terms of inheritance, you see, Arif, even if I don't have actual relatives Until the 16th century, half Italy was under the deep influence of Turkish pirates. Coasts were not safe. So
Barbarossa.
exactly. And there was also a pirate, namely Ucciali. Ucciali was from Calabria, which is from the deep south, and his name was Occhiali. But it was moved in Ucciali, and this, as Italian, he then served the Ottoman Empire. What I would like to say about the Hungarians, well, I think there is somehow a long-term narrative bringing the country not just westward, but also eastward. And that's why you could easily see the difference during the last 20 to 30 years in terms of Turkish connection, Turkish common inheritance. But we should always consider, Arif, that Hungarians are extremely proud. So are extremely proud. They're very proud, but they would not like to be mixed with the Turkish people. So they can, and this is easily to understand, because actually the Hungarian language is spoken only in Hungary, and this builds up the community, not in an isolated way, but in a very specific way. Indeed, the Hungarian language has some common roots with the Finnish language, which is very, very far away. So they feel like stuck. They are like stuck between the East and the West. So when they come to study their history, they study that Wallachia eastward was almost Turkish. They study that at the beginning of early modern era, there were parts of southeast Hungary which were connected to the Ottoman Empire in terms of paying taxations and all that stuff. So that's why there's a deep connection, even more than the connection of Venice and the Ottoman Empire, or Italy and the Ottoman Empire. So I was exaggerating saying that I have Turkish ancestors, but we may acknowledge that the connection, the historical connection of Hungary and the Turkish border is so deep, so deep. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. I promise just to stop torturing you with the questions outside of our main subject. We will soon switch to main, historical issues. But before that, I have a couple of questions which are related to today's Europe, European elections. We had, results of the European elections. They are known. Some, of course, right parties have got much more votes that they used to have in the past. Even parties which were in the past having 2%, 3%, now they get 30, 40%, which is absolutely new. It's not unexpected, because many were expecting that this will come, because it is a general fatigue of European population about this green agenda, about migration problem not resolved, about the war in Ukraine, which is also making many people nervous about the future of the Europe, about the price of fuel, about price of energy, which increased in some countries, double priced, triple price, which makes, of course, many people nervous about that. But what do you think, the Latin word, quo vadis Europe? Is it correct,
Yeah.
quo vadis?
Yeah, it's correct.
Yeah,
quo
vadis Europe. Where are you going, Europe? And Europe after elections, and in expectations of the US elections, because Europe is very much linked, the Western world is very much linked to the United States. As superpower, United States, after the Second World War, its role became absolutely, keystone role in providing security for Europe, in providing economic growth, like Marshall Plan, which helped Europe to stand again and become economic power, political power. And what do you think that Europeans are thinking of today's Europe? What they expect? Do they expect things will change for better, or they are a little bit lost in all this everyday new changes, new things? What do you think? What is your evaluation where Europe goes?
Well, I will start from this last question. Some friends of mine visited Greece, visited Czech Republic in the run-up of the EU elections, and actually they could see a very, very low commitment in terms of advertisement, in terms of even watching local TV programs, browsing local newspaper, especially in Greece. Well, we can understand easily why in Greece this, of course, but also in Czech Republic, which is actually strongly committed towards the defense of the West in our present days. When it comes to Italy, I have to tell you that the European elections were seen and perceived by Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, like a waterproof of the popular engagement. So Brothers of Italy received the support of the voter, but nevertheless, the support to Partito Democratico, which is on the left side, Democratic Party, was very, very strong, because Partito Democratico can easily aggregate its voters. It's very well organized. And so we easily saw that there was, at least in Italy, a lower expectation than usual towards the EU. And I see this, and I say this as Italian, so perhaps I have some bias. I have some prejudice about that. But when it comes to the real matter, to what Machiavelli would call the effective truth of the things, la verità effettuale, the things which brings fruit, we should look at the US elections. If it is true that if it is true that what happened to Mr. Trump on that day will easily deliver him the victory, well, things are not going so well for Europe. Why? Well, because von der Leyen is actually, let's say, a German former Minister of Defense. She's not a politician like former statesmen, and she actually doesn't have the, let's say, the practical skills to deal with these geopolitical issues. Nevertheless, Europe will manage the best way it can the wave of Trump. The wave of Trump means higher costs for defense. And I don't see a good honeymoon for the forthcoming years in case Trump wins. But I don't want to be the fan of astrology. I just say that after what happened to Trump, he can easily gain victory. And in this case, things will really turn bad for Europe.
Yeah, some people say that this fire was in fact not against Trump, but against Biden, so that Biden suffered more than Trump. Trump had, he wound on his ear, but probably for Biden now to win elections is becoming almost impossible after all these things happen. So that you say that maybe not very good news for Europe, but maybe good news for some of European countries, including Hungary, which is
well, President Orban, very professional in every interview, says that no one meddles in foreign affairs, and that's the political line. But fairly, we shall assume that in the US political landscape, there is a party which is strongly committed towards revolution in foreign countries, and another party which is more historically connected to the Monroe Doctrine. So in this occasion, Trump would play for the Monroe Doctrine. Then you see
isolation. You mean isolation?
Yeah, isolation. Then you know, Yarif, you have plenty of historians, plenty of analysts, political analysts, who will write different things of the Monroe Doctrine, but the Monroe Doctrine is very easy to understand. The Monroe Doctrine is not actually based in the 30s, when Monroe played as a politician, but actually is rooted earlier in history, and precisely in the writings and actions of John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, when we go and when we read his farewell address, which was written in 1821, we see the clear lines which says, America doesn't go abroad looking for monsters. So that's very easy to understand. And that's what Mr. Trump will do, even better than what he managed to do in 2016. He will not go away for monsters to fight. And when I say monster, I say that there is a precise, let's say, ideologue party in the US trying to eradicate national characters of the country and trying to bring in, I just do an example, the rainbow flag wherever it can, maybe even in Afghanistan, as they did, or in Budapest, as they are trying to do now. Well, this is one way of conducting foreign affairs, which is not what Trump will do. And so that's why some countries like Hungary can benefit for sure, in case Mr. Trump will win.
Thank you very much. For me, I have never been supporter of Donald Trump, but the way that he took this shot, he Stood and he said fight, fight, fight. It was very strong image. If the bullet didn't pass his ear, probably I would think that probably it was prepared, like scene. But of course, the best shooter in the world wouldn't risk to fire and just hurt ear without having risk to blow his head. Just it was. Some people believe that it is a God decision, or God saved him. But probably sometimes God saves people for good, sometimes for bad, and I don't know what his role will play. You're absolutely right that probably he will push Europeans to spend more for its defense, because he says America is not going to pay for your security. You have to pay for your security yourself. But even before Trump coming to power, during the last 4 or 5 years, most of the European countries adjusted their military budget, and they pay 2%. Some countries even pay more, like Poland, I think that pays 4%. And some countries are either paying 2 or more percent. So that probably now there will be less pressure, but still we see that in Trump is quite critical of European politics, of European, and he was quite arrogant with some European leaders. He was very arrogant with Angela Merkel. He was quite arrogant with other leaders, with I remember Montenegro Prime Minister. He just pushed him away like it was a chair or something like this. I believe that shake-up is needed in US, including foreign policy shake-up. Probably something should come, and I believe that also many Europeans want this war to be stopped, Ukraine-Russia war. In fact, it is Russian aggression against Ukraine. But European economies suffer a lot. They know that they cannot. I spoke recently with one Finnish diplomat, and I said that, do you think that your countries, and she was from external action, I said that, do you think that Europe will be able to support Ukraine for the next couple of years or more years? She said, very unlikely, because we have aging population. We have to pay more money for social, for pension, for health system, because we have problems. And European economies are not doing as well as they were doing like 10, 20 years ago. And we see also pressure from the East coming, So probably Europeans want this war to be over. And but nobody knows. Trump was saying that he will stop this war in one day. Do you think that he can stop this war in one day or 1 month even?
Well, honestly, I don't have a crystal ball, Arif, but what I am astonishing, what astonishes me is the historical analogy with the origins of Monroe Doctrine. So, as I mentioned, as I told you, there was this politician, the former president, John Quincy Adams. Well, John Quincy Adams managed to establish a diplomatic treaty with Russia at a time when no one wanted to do that in the 19th century. Well, I think this can be let's say a seductive historical analogy. And maybe John Quincy Adams was slower than Trump will be, but anyway, we will find fruits. We will see fruits of his work.
Thank you very much. I remember one of the recent MCC discussion was, is Europe losing its attractiveness? Something like this. I didn't attend this last event, but do you think that Europe is losing its attractiveness? Why I ask this question? Because it is in the context of our discussion. Like some believe that Europe is becoming museum. Nice, art buildings of the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, but it stops becoming power, like economic power, military power. And what happened to Venice? Venice once was superpower. What is today Venice? Museum. Venice is museum. Florence is museum. Naples is museum. Once they were, so powerful that they could afford fighting with Ottomans. Can you imagine? Venice, small Venice, could create alliances, of course not alone, but with alliances with Cyprus, Rhodes, and fight Ottomans. Today, Venice is museum. Today, Brussels is political capital, but probably it will be also good museum with Grand Place, maybe with good food also. But it is losing its power, particularly compared to the emerging South, headed by China, and so that now we see power shifts towards Asia, power shifts towards other parts of the world, and there is less and less dependence or admiration with the West. Before, all these countries, Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they were looking to Europe, to the United States, like our big bosses. We depend on you. We are ready to do anything. Just save us. Just keep us. But now, you see, they are looking more and more towards China. They're looking more and more towards their own interests. They say that no, we don't need any more, payment only in US dollars. We would accept other currencies, or say that we don't need military protection. We can handle our security on our own. So that this does it mean that Europe is losing its attractiveness? And then I stop. We go to history.
Yeah, that's interesting. That, after Venice collapsed when Napoleon conquered it, well, then it was subsumed. It was taken up by the Habsburg Empire. Well,
Yes.
in 1833, the harbor of Trieste was deeply empowered. So compared to the time of early modern history, Trieste emerged as a power, as a Macht, as the German would say, as a Machtstadt, a powerful city. And in 1833, the Austrian Lloyd Company was founded, and that was the most important Austrian shipping company. I read an interesting essay about it, and I collected this figure. It was formed by a group of 19 insurance companies and credit institutions. Well, nowadays, Trieste is almost in, I use a metaphor, Chinese hands, despite the fact that Italy, with the brothers of Italy, shift rather towards the US. Well, Trieste is still deeply in Chinese hands, and that tells us a lot in terms of, we may say, historical cycles or historical repetition. At the same time, we have in Italy a strong Chinese presence also in Genoa, which is on the west side of Italy, and Palermo. Palermo, deep in the Mediterranean Sea, is quite important because together with Piraeus port in Greece, brings the footprint of Chinese presence. And that, again, tells a lot about how the Mediterranean is divided. Some analysts, some thinkers argue that shifting towards Europe is the first step of China in order to take Africa and not the reverse. So apparently, we may think that conquering Africa is easier than taking Europe. Well, for many analysts, that it is not so, and that's why Africa is still contended, while at the same time, Italy is rather in Chinese hands. Still today, still after the negative backlash of COVID pandemic, because after COVID pandemic, Chinese image was deeply damaged, especially in Italy, especially. So we still have this situation.
Yeah, but China, in the like 10 years ago, we have seen China infiltrating to the Africa, and now it builds bridges, railroads, big factories in Africa. It is now dominant power in Africa. It's not anymore France. It's not United States. It's not anybody else, but China. And for China, there were some areas which were difficult to penetrate, mostly countries under French influence. But China, with the hands of Russians, pushed France from the French-speaking African countries like Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Mali, and other countries which were traditionally area of influence of France. China didn't do it itself, but it asked Russia, and Russia did it. So now we can say that China is a dominant power in Africa. In Europe, it's, if you mentioned cities that where China builds its infrastructure, all these port cities. Trieste is a port city. Genoa is a port city. In Georgia, even, now Georgia, we never had Chinese investment in the Caucasus. Now they are building the biggest seaport in Anakria, in Georgian Black Sea port. And it is now very speedily taking very important key points, particularly transport links, transport junctions, because in the future they think about their Silk Way, Chinese project of the one way, one road, and it all, if you connect the dots, you see there are Chinese, Black Sea, Trieste, Italy, Genoa, some other ports, you said in Greece and in other countries. It also, Europe doesn't want, of course, to open its market to the Chinese cars, electric cars. Now China is number one in producing electric cars. What they did, they opened the electric car factory where? In Hungary. So that it's an EU country, and by this they can, nobody can say to Hungary, you cannot export your cars. So China is slowly but very surely enters also European market and European transport connections, because now all these infrastructural projects are extremely expensive to develop, like in Trieste port or Genoa. It needs renovation, but nobody has such a money to do this, but China does it. So yes, this is a reality. Okay, we stop here and we switch to our historical context, which is very important in terms of what we have today. And if we compare geopolitics of the 14th, 15th century and today's geopolitics, maybe the regions have shifted, but geopolitical games are the same. Sweetie tweety, cat and mouse games, but finally everybody has its interest. Sometimes this interest can be coincide, and like economic relations. Probably the biggest economical partner of Venice was Ottoman Empire, and the biggest partner of the Ottoman Empire was Venice, because it was buying lots of goods on both sides. But each one had its own interest and its own ambitions. So Ottomans and Italian principalities, Venice, Naples, Holy See. Just I give you the floor to you, because my historical knowledge limits to my university education. At a university, we had mostly two historical subjects. It was history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and history of Marxism and Leninism. And we hated both of the disciplines. We were just trying to pass exam, and that's it. So that our history was more like ideological. But real history, I know that you are a better historian. I give the floor.
Sorry for interrupting, Arif. There was this joke at the time of the Cold War, which is pretty useful even today. So this joke said that for most historians, it's very hard to predict the future. But when it comes to Soviet historians, it's hard to predict the past, because actually, well, time changes, but nevertheless, I'd like to give you a couple of insights, one concerning Hungary and the other concerning Venice. Both of them are related to Ottoman. So what about Hungary? At the time of Mattia Corvinus, which means roughly, I will tell you, there was this amazing situation. It was the 70s. So we are in 1471, 1472. A plan was conceived and concocted in the diplomatic courts of Italy, and especially in Venice, in Naples, in Rome. They wanted to stop the expansion of the Ottomans westwards. And how they wanted to do that? Well, they wanted to build an alliance with the empire, which was eastwards of the Ottoman Empire. And in this case, there was the empire of what we now call Iran. Back then, it was ruled by Uzun Hasan. Sorry for my pronunciation.
No, and what happened? Uzun Hasan means tall Hassan. It is Turkic word. Uzun means tall.
Tall. Great. Well, Uzun, despite having some marriages connection with one of the Venetian ambassador, didn't take the alliance at his heart. I mean, he engaged in the alliance, but he could not force the Ottoman empires on their eastern flank to reduce their military capabilities. Why? Well, because at the same time, Hungary and Poland didn't join the alliance. Why? Again, because, well, at the time of Mattia Corvinus, the Hungarian kingdom was the biggest ever. It conquered territories westward towards Vienna, and so Corvinus wanted to press on its western border and didn't want to, let's say, provoke furthermore the Ottoman Empire, because you see, that's the nature of Hungary. Always, always, always. If you press towards one direction, just stay calm on the other. So Corvinus didn't join the alliance against the Ottomans. And as a result, together with many other things, the Ottomans established their presence in the Mediterranean. And there is this nickname for the Mediterranean Sea, which is the Turkish Lake. So for centuries, the Mediterranean remained Turkish. And despite the fact that Venice, together with some Western countries, defeated the Ottomans in Lepanto in 1571, well, despite this, the Ottomans still prevailed. I should add something, you know, some historians argue that due to the large, big money expenditure of Venice in the Lepanto battle, well, the Republic of Venice couldn't recover. I think this is just a partial explanation, because there are two schools of thought. One school of thought says that, as Cicero, the Latin lawyer, said, money is the nerve system of war. So if you want to irradiate your troops, you need money. This is a common sense sentence, but on the other, we should assume that money is not everything. It's not 100% what a good army needs. Why? Well, we have sources of the time, especially Machiavelli, who is together with us in the painting, who said that you don't just need money to build up a proper army, but you need national armies. And that's why he said Turkish Empire is so good. So what we were talking about, the alliance of Venice and Usunasan against the Ottoman, dates back from 1471-73. Well, Machiavelli is writing 40 years later, so we are still in this same historical melting pot. And Machiavelli says you need a national army. Don't bring mercenary arm to conquer other city, because he says when Florence did like this, Florence brought in Italy many French mercenaries, defeated Pisa, which is westwards. Today, just take 1 hour by train. Well, these French mercenaries, after gaining Pisa, created lots of trouble, which he says is something which doesn't happen in the Ottoman empires. And I was looking at the prints, and he mentions exactly this in one of the very first chapter 13. He then insists on this when it comes to the Turkish way of ruling. He draws an interesting comparison between the Turkish way of ruling and the Egyptian one. So he says, El Turco e El Soldano. So for sure, El Turco is the Ottoman, and Soldano is the Sultan in Egypt. He gives figures. Machiavelli, this is something we should be remarked, because The Prince is not just a book of politics, but it's a book of contemporary politics. So why isn't Italy united? Why is France much more powerful than Italy? Why isn't it very easy to conquer the Ottoman Empire? Well, all of this we find in Machiavelli's Prince. He says that it's very, very easy to conquer and enter France, but it's not that easy to maintain the power, because you can prevail of the local, let's say, quarrels of the local baronage and baronet, and you can enter, but then you cannot reign over them. Why? At the same time, he says that it's extremely difficult to enter the Ottoman Empire and to break it. But once you are there, you can rule it. This is something extremely interesting. When a reader of The Prince takes chapter 4, he reads that the reason of the difficulty, and I am translating, the reason of the difficulty of occupying the Turkish reign is this: whoever occupies it will be called in the Ottoman Empire by the local prince, but cannot hope that this local prince will ever rebel. Why? He says because the Ottoman Empire is built up of, let's say, enslaved, obliged citizens. So he says, tutti schiavi ed obbligati, which doesn't mean that the Ottoman Empire is built up of slaves. It means that they have a deep obligation towards the Ottoman capital. And so he says, si possono con più difficoltà corrompere, which means it's so difficult to corrupt an Ottoman. So that tells a lot about the moral prejudice, which still nowadays prevail even in Europe. You see, Arif, there is this common prejudice which can be partially true. This common prejudice says that Southern Europe doesn't want to work, but can be corrupted in a very much easier way compared to Northern Europe. Well, Machiavelli is saying rightly the opposite, because he said that it's very, very difficult to corrupt an Ottoman prince. Why? He says,
it's not true today.
Yeah, indeed. He says, essendogli tutti schiavi ed obbligati, si possono con più difficoltà corrompere, which means chapter 4 of the Prince says, as a matter of fact, all Turkish Ottoman citizens are obliged and metaphorically enslaved towards the capital city. So it's very difficult to corrupt them. It's very difficult to enter the reign. And then he says, e quando bene si corrompessino, se ne può sperare poco utile, non potendo quelli trarsi dietro i popoli, which means even when you manage to corrupt them, to bring them on your side and enter the country, you can hope to gain very, very few, very, very little, because the princes don't bring people behind them. So there is not a closer connection between at the various levels of Ottoman society. And that's, I think, it's extremely useful when looking at the history of relation of Venice and Turkey. Because you see, there was not just Venice. Venice was the most powerful and richest in Italy, but you always had Florence, Naples, and each of them had a peculiar function. We should assume that Florence diplomatic service was not as important as the Napolitan one or as the Venice one, while indeed the Venice diplomatic service was maybe at the same time of the English foreign service, but it's something which is not so spoken about every day. But that's why we should do that today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Particularly when you said that it's very difficult to corrupt Turkish elites. Now probably it is the easiest, so that many things change. And of course, probably before the power of the Sultan was so powerful, he didn't need to be corrupted. And secondly, being corrupted meant that you lose your head. So if Sultan would know that you were somewhere, Sultan had so much power, and there was fear. There was more fear to be, to do something which might anger Sultan. But anyway, we spoke about, Italian. Of course, today is these territories which are part of Italy. You mentioned we spoke about Venice, Naples, Florence. Which one we know that Florence was very rich financially, like financial center. It was like London city, because there were lots of wealthy families. Probably in Venice as well. What is the most biggest difference between Venice, Naples, Florence, even in today Italy? Are they all museums only, or they still have some specificity?
Well, I should tell you that the difference still prevail, especially amongst these cities. When it comes to Rome, we have a peculiar situation because you have a capital city of two countries, which is something rather neglected. But we should remember that Rome is still the capital city of Italy and the Vatican City. So when it comes to Venice, you will find the perfect landscape for painters and writers who want to find their inspiration, or for people looking for, let's say, their corner of paradise, because it is actually indeed a paradise, despite the fact that costs are rising. And so it's very, very important to find a good place where locals Venetian go and enjoy a sprizzino, which is the Campari, and not pay 1 million for it. So you just take care and find the proper corner of the cities. While at the same time, Naples, it's just the opposite, because in almost every corner of Naples, you will enjoy a perfect pizza for 3 to 5 euros, which sounds amazing in Brussels, but that's the, we may say, Muslim way of life. So Naples is basically a city where common piety and social connection still exist, despite the fact that there is a proper connection and the sense of belonging to the city. Well, despite all of this, there is a negative character. What? Well, Napolitans are very, very good at self-decrying and complaining. So they will assume that Naples became poorer when it was enlisted in Italy in 1861. And we should assume that this is not the case, because even at the time of Renaissance, Naples was not the richest city. It didn't have a bank system as developed as in Florence. Just remember, Arif, that before the plague of the 14th century, the Florentine bankers, Bardi, Peruzzi, were lending money to the King of England. Well, after the pandemic, the King of England didn't repay. And many historians tell this narrative that after the pandemics, Florence never regained this energy. That can be seen as a truth, especially after the pandemics of last year. We can see what pandemics create. And we can see also some difference, when I was searching for information about our conversation today, I discovered that today, for the Islamic school of, sorry for the pronunciation, Naqshbandiya Khalidiyya, which is the school to which Erdogan belongs to, well, in this Sharia school of thought, the charging of loan interest is still condemned. This tells us a lot of the history of civilization, because you see, in the Christian legacy, the charging of loan interest was not something bad. Having too much money was something bad. Too much money was called the shit of the devil. So people still believe that at the time of Florentine bankers, that too much money brought with it a sense of guilty. But nevertheless, the charging of loan interest was a common practice, which brought Italian principalities wealth, well-being, and, as we can see, much art. So I made a long story out of it, but I really love my cities in Italy. So that's why I spent a lot of time. And maybe
you studied in Pisa, yes?
Yeah, you remember very well. Pisa is a tiny city which is connected to the Ottoman Empire. Well, if you go on the website and look for Cavalieri di Pisa, well, Cavalieri is like Chevalier. You find that there is this big church, and inside this church, there are still the flags which were stolen from the Ottoman in Lepanto, which is something rather provocative and rather controversial. So that's why this church is not open every day of the week because there are still the flags. And well, the Cavalieri were later to become the Knights of Malta, and so they are still connected with this kind of heritage of Christendom. And the Pisa is very little when compared to Florence, but nevertheless, it's still part of Tuscany. So there are just local rivalries, but they are part of the same landscape.
Yeah, we see, Venice was a very important, center of trade. I think that Ottoman army even bought ships from Venice before the Battle of Constantinople. Venice was also very important shipyard. It was maybe a major producer of for that time, quite modern ships. And Venice was capable of defending it mostly because of good fleet, and of course this Battle of Lepanto speaks for itself, that the Ottoman had good fleet, but Venice had even better fleet and had more possibilities. But why Venice was so paranoid about Ottomans, that they wanted always to do something to weaken by making alliance, or some trying to get deals with Persians, with Uzun Hassan, yes, yeah, and with other Persian rulers, just to do something that Turkey gets involved in other places so that they can live in peace. Well, to what extent Venice was successful in trying to to make other alliances? Is it done mostly for its own security, or it was done just to prevent Turkish aspiration for bigger control in the Mediterranean, Adriatic? This Cyprus, Rhodos, and other islands. They were part of Venice or not?
Yes, they were, but then they were lost in the years following the Mist Treaty with Corvinus. So at the very beginning of 16th century, which is somehow the zenith of the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean. Well, you asked me the perfect question, and I would rather say that the answer is the second one, which is the most elaborated of your question, because yes, they didn't just wanted to make the Ottomans weaker, but they wanted as well to keep the wellness for them only. So when we talk about the alliance with Uzun, we are in 1470, and back then the war was much more little. Back then the war was much more little. So Venice had still in mind the wealth of the Far East. Well, I should draw three lines from the Mediterranean to the Far East. There was not just one way. The first is a kind of just land route from Uzun land, which means Mesopotamia, through Persia and India, and then this route went northwards to China, and then southward to the Spice Islands, which means wealth, because the spices were extremely expensive in the Middle Ages. So alliances were built also, especially to gain the spices, not the electrical batteries, but the spices. Then there was a second route, which was mainly maritime passage. These passages, and I'm looking at the map, after a short stretch between the Nile and the Red Sea, this passage crossed the Indian Ocean and reached India, and then again China. So we have a second passage, the third one, and we are oversimplifying, but that helps a lot. This third route started from Constantinople, which was not more the case after it was conquered by the Ottoman, but that's the story of Venice in the Middle Age. So this route started from Constantinople and ran along the Black Sea and then towards the steppes of Central Asia through Samarkand. And here we are, Central Asia, today like yesterday. Well, Venice wanted the spices, wanted to keep the contact with China in a kind of reverse way to what China is trying to do even today. And that's why Marco Polo becomes a very important symbol for soft power for Chinese usage. I should also add something else, Arif, if you allow me. You know, this is a very this is an extreme sensitive topic because we talk about civilization, and we're not talking about them just in terms of clash, as some ideologues do. We rather prefer to see how they intricate themselves and try to build alliances. Yet, it's a very controversial terrain. Just imagine that this book, Orientalism, by the author Edward Said, claimed that only Arab can write the Arab history, and that whoever tries to do this from an external point of view is an Orientalist. So he has many, many bias. Well, this is a book which has the disgraceful influence of the American academia, and still today on the Italian academia. Why? Because it's full of factual errors in terms of history. When you open Orientalism by Edward Said, which was written in the 70s, you read at the very first page that the Arabs conquered first Turkey and later North Africa, which is an immense mistake when it comes to our subject of the Ottomans. And always Said says that at the end of the 16th century, Great Britain was the most powerful country in Eastern Mediterranean. So you see, it's like the Battle of Lepanto never occurred, and well, Great Britain had still to come. And we should keep in mind that it is a very sensitive topic. So that's why an approach based on diplomacy and peace can bring more result, even when explaining this process in historical terms, rather than just battles, the lists of battles and defeats and killings. But this is my personal point of view. I know many people prefer other versions.
No. It's very, very extremely interesting. What are today Italy-Turkish relationship? I see that there are good level of cooperation between leaders, between Giorgia Meloni, Erdogan. We see like quite soft. We have seen them meeting at the NATO summit on the anniversary of the NATO alliance. I don't see any big clashes of interest, even on the Mediterranean. It's more between Turkey, Greece, Turkey, France, but less between Turkey and Italy. There is more, I think, that more positive trend. Is it true? Or?
That's the perfect question, Arif. Well, in the last years, the high-speed train in Turkey was built by the same company which built the high-speed trains in Italy. At the same time, I read the news of, let's say, selling in the defense sector, so they still do their job. Some analysts, despite the fact that they hate Turkey inside NATO, should do acknowledge that Turkey's expansion policy is more intelligent than the Chinese one. So this is an interesting paradox when I read Western analysis. They are a bit scared, the most ideologized are a bit scared about Turkey still inside NATO and the issue of sharing all level of information. But at the same time, they acknowledge that despite the fact that Turkey enjoys fewer resources than China, its policy is much, much more clever. We have a word for this in Italian, which is Levantino. Levantino means connected to Levante. Levante east means east, which means in the very usage of Italian language, whoever lives eastwards, which doesn't mean Israel or Palestine, but just mean Turkey is clever. And there is a kind of, let's say, also negative nuance in this word, but it's usually employed in a positive sense. And so you see, the way in which a country uses its own language tells a lot. That tells a lot also about the diplomatic situation. Well, you know, Ankara aims to play the role of an energy hub with Azerbaijani, Russian, LNG gas. So when we take note that Turkey has the largest regasification capacity in the region, we understand why Italy needs it. We understand also why the US needs Italy, because, well, the US looks with more natural sympathy towards Italy rather than to the autonomy, how do they call it, strategic autonomy of France or the German economic area. Well, the US did what they did, even though they were not there with the Nord Stream, because they didn't want the German economic area. And what happened in Africa, the chaos, didn't rise just because of the Russian, because also the Americans, the US is pretty good at creating chaos. So that's something which will not happen in Italy, against Italy. And that's something which is not going to happen in a rather close period of time to Turkey as well. They are somehow protected by the fact that they are so projected into the Mediterranean, and they can counterbalance the French strategic autonomy and the German economic area. So that's why Sigonella base is still important. That's why the American fleet in Naples is still important, despite the fact that let's say the next war, the next battles will be fought, who knows when, in the Pacific and not in the Mediterranean. But maybe I'm exaggerating too much, as I'm not a diplomat.
No. I think that you're absolutely right. Probably we don't speak about the next war, but now we are in the middle of war. We have many wars. We have over 100 conflicts, but over 40 conflicts which are hot conflicts, real conflicts, between, or civil wars like in Ethiopia, or Ukrainian-Russian war, or many potential conflicts, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey-Greece tension, which is always threatening to become, or Russia-Baltic states, or many potential areas. But I worked in Africa from 88 to 90 in Ethiopia. And I remember when I was there was still very strong memory about Italian presence in Eritrea. And it was so positive. Ethiopians didn't like Russians when Soviet Union was there, but they had very good memory about Italian presence. And I don't look Italian, but I look less Russian than Italian, I would say, like this, because Russian is completely different. And when they saw that I am a foreigner, many were thinking that I am Italian, and they were treating me better. Oh, Italiano. I was like, yeah, like this. But I didn't speak Italian. But still, it was a pleasure and many words like in Ethiopian language, they use lots of Italian words. So that Italy, I don't know why and how, but there were lots of warm sentiments towards all Italian culture, Italian music, Italian art. When I was young, a teenager or young person, I remember the music that we liked the most was Sanremo festival. It wasn't other festival, but Sanremo was number one. And Pupo, Tutto, Cotugne, and all this we knew, like Albano and Ricci, and all this we knew like by heart. It was like, my youth were, and Italian films, and Italian music, Italian culture. So that in Azerbaijan, when we were describing nice women, we were saying that she's so beautiful, she's like Italian. So that there was like, I don't know, maybe it's historical, maybe some connection of the past, but I don't remember somebody saying something negative. there are like countries that even we don't know very well, but all Italian is like immediately good, like Italian shoes. Of course, Italian shoes were Italian dress, Italian woman, Italian style, Italian films, Celentano, Mucci, Angelo Mucci, and all this. We grew on that, and and even there is some, maybe Mediterranean culture and Caucasian culture. There are similarities. Of course, we can, if we go back to the history, there were Alexander the Great was in the Caucasus. There is, strong connection between Caucasus and Roman Empire, Empire of Alexander the Great, so that we were enriched by Italian culture. And today, these relations between Azerbaijan, probably now, one of the best relations of Azerbaijan is with Italy. Of course, probably Hungary is number one for taking the nature of the governments in Baku and in Hungary, but Italy is well ranked now. I don't know whether we pass to the last question. My last question would be about Niccolo Machiavelli, because he stands between two of us, and he was a great man. Probably can tell about his some specific things about him. If you don't want to add something to what I said right now.
Oh, well, I think it can be useful for our friends online. I think there is a reason for this. I think the reason is historical, and it's connected to the last fruits of the Renaissance. So in the metaphor, the autumn of Renaissance, not the winter. So we had two authors. One was a friend of the painter Raffaello. His name was Baldassare Castiglione. And the other was Monsignor della Casa. So these are two important people. Why? Because Castiglione wrote the Cortigiano, so a short essay about the courtesan. How a courtesan acts? Well, he says he acts with sprezzatura. Sprezzatura means behaving in an elegant way, but don't overemphasize it. Make it natural. I think this is part of our inheritance. You see, maybe an Italian, even when he's wearing elegant dresses, looks a bit more natural than a French, or a bit more natural than I don't know why, maybe compared to someone with a smoking. And that's part of the sprezzatura. So behave and wear elegant, but don't make this appear too much. And the other thing is connected to this, and it's the Galateo. So I don't know the exact word in English for this. Galateo means the art of behaving well. Galateo was written by Monsignor della Casa and was the short that was 20 pages, which every court would read in the 16th, 17th century. It's very boring, but that tells a lot about how people can deliver a good impression, because for sure people in Scandinavian countries are more, I don't know how to say, more direct maybe, or people in Brazil are more direct as well. Maybe an Italian will take time to understand what he's thinking, but that's part of the character. And that's, I think, connect the Mediterranean countries. Not in name of abstract connection, but in terms of history. Yeah, there is a deep connection, indeed.
Thank you very much. So the last topic is Machiavelli. Just maybe you can tell some specific things. Most of the people heard or read The Prince, the most important Machiavelli book, but of course he wrote many other books. But and he knew very well Ottoman history. He also concentrated on the Ottoman system of power, on the Janissary, on the structure of the Ottoman army, how they conquered the cities, the big countries. So please, you just
Do you recall that I mentioned this story of Florence, who wanted to defeat Pisa and called in French mercenaries? So at the chapter 13 of The Prince, Machiavelli says that this French army, this mercenary army, brought more danger in Italy than all the others. Whilst, he says, the Emperor of Constantinople, and I'm translating, but in Italian, the Emperor of Constantinople, as he wanted to oppose his closest countries, invaded Greece with 10,000 Turkish people, and once the war was over, the Turkish people didn't want to leave. And so this was, he says, principio della servitù della Grecia con gli infedeli, which means this was the time when Greece became a slave to the infidel Ottoman Empire, unfaithful. Unfaithful is a political term which Machiavelli uses to describe a non-Christian country. Doesn't mean that Machiavelli is not implying that Turkish are untrustworthy. Turkish are untrustworthy in the same measures of the Spanish kings, of the French kings, of the Italian principalities. They are just of another religion, he says. And this is chapter 13, but we can go on and go on. And what I find extremely amazing is chapter 19. He says that for every prince, except for the Turkish and the Sultan of Egypt, it is important to satisfy the people. He says it is not important for the Turkish ruler to satisfy the people, because the Turkish ruler has to satisfy the soldier. And well, you see, even before the Janissary, which means the royal guard, for our listener, even before the Janissary were established and formalized, Machiavelli had understood what was going on, even though he didn't read newspaper and didn't travel so far. Why? Because he was reading the histories of Livio, concerning the establishment of Rome, the foundation of Rome. And every time after, you see, if this is what is important for our readers and listeners, the Prince is not something which is written by a winner. Machiavelli says that this was written when he lost everything. Doesn't mean that he lost money or lost family, because he was living in the countryside in Settignano, quiet, and after a long day in the fields doing little works, he came back home, he says, he writes in a letter, and wears more comfortable dress. And he says, I feel like a Roman, because then I studied Roman history. That's the time when he compares his diplomatic experiences, delegazioni, which means the art of sending letters from foreign dispatches. He compares this to Roman history, and he understands what's going on in Turkey. This is amazing. I would only like to remark one thing. You know, in the British Anglosphere, in the US Anglosphere, scholars, readers tend to regard Machiavelli as a kind of modern political thinker, which means they take it from the Italian Renaissance and put it inside the Republican tradition, which is an exaggeration. Whilst at the same time, when I was in Italy, I remember that many readers and scholars, polymaths and all the stuff, did the opposite, which means they took Machiavelli from the Renaissance and put it in the Middle Age. So they wanted to emphasize that Machiavelli was very connected to the medieval books, Hermetic books. I think there is not just one explanation. We should just assume that Machiavelli lived in this time, was, let's say, propelled towards our future, and at the same time very rooted in his past. But there is no single answer. So we cannot say Machiavelli is a modern thinker or a medieval thinker, useless thinker. The reason is ambiguous. The answer is ambiguous and exactly in the middle, I think.
Yeah. Andrea, well, you mentioned Janissary, the Turkish model, when they took Christian children from the families in the Balkans, Croats, Bulgars. They grew them in the Turkic tradition. In fact, they took kids, they made them warriors, they made them mercenary, very well trained soldiers. Was it Turkish invention, or in the history this kind of practice existed in other. As an historian, do you have some historical parallels if other countries use the same system of taking kids and making them, real war machines?
Well, this is something which occurred during the Roman Empire. We may draw an historical analogy. You see,
Yes.
we take comfort with Machiavelli, and we can use his mindset. Machiavelli said, never use mercenaries. So who were the countries who didn't employ mercenaries? Were the Turks, were the Egyptians, and the Turks were extremely professional at this because they took young children and built them as professional killers and soldiers. We may say that the Romans did the same because, when Roman Republic expanded towards northern Italy, Rome conquered the lands, put old soldiers on this land to cultivate, and then sent these soldiers again to fight. But a common citizen with this land in northern Italy, in Milano, was not a native of Rome. So we may say that his connection to Rome was somehow forced. Then, for sure, it was not a technical process like in the Turkish Empire with the Janissary. But there is also an historical analogy which is rather fascinating, and that's the history of the assassins, which is extremely at the crossroads of legends and historical narratives. I just read a book by a French author, which is really based on knowledge of sources, but you can really read it like an amazing novel, because the landscape is exotic, and for our listeners, the assassins were basically trained to be killers using only knives. And we may say that there is an analogy with the Janissary because the assassins were a sect inside the sect, so they were a sect inside the Shia. That's rather interesting because, for sure, they belong to.
Before that, they were like in Judah, when there was resistance to the Roman Empire of Jewish, not assassins. There was even
Zealots. They were the zealots.
Zealots. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I was. It was in my mind. Zealots. In fact, this is even people believe that Jesus was belonging to this. I don't know to what extent is true or not, but they were resisting the Roman Empire, and they were having knives with them, and if there was something, they were killing Roman soldiers. So zealots were the first, and then assassins were probably afterwards, or it was more or less the same historical.
Yeah, it was. There is a closer analogy. Analogy. First the zealots, and afterwards, but not so late, the assassins. Could be 11th century, but I don't want to make mistakes. And nevertheless, what distinguishes these practices from the Janissary is the technicality, because the Janissary took advantage of, let's say, ambiguous territory like the Balkans, and they crossed the borders, and they propelled their mental habit without soft power, but with this massive military apparatus, which is the very opposite of soft power.
Yeah, I know that these kids were taken from the families. They were converted to Islam. They were growing in the Islamic tradition. They were reading Quran. They were learning to write, so that, and they had possibility of becoming grand viziers, grand So there was, career growth possibilities for these Janissaries, and they were, some of them were very successful, and they were raising to the like grand viziers, like prime ministers of the Ottoman Empire. These children from Greek families, and as I understand that also parents were given some compensation, so that for their children, and in some later stage, the children could also help their parents. In the beginning, not, but steadily they could, establish a link with their families and help them. We are on the stream for more than 1.5 hours. Thank you, Andrea. It was very great pleasure. Of course, our public is mostly Azeri and Russian speakers, and people ask me, can you next time to make a stream and translate today's conversation? I will try to do this maybe with some subtitles going on, but it was extremely interesting, and I hope that our public will grow English language, because unfortunately still in our part of the world not many people speak English, but it's coming, and I believe that our public should grow, not only Russian speaking, Azeri speaking, but also English speaking. Probably sometime we can have programs in Italian or in French or any other language. Once again, thank you very much, Andrea. It was great pleasure having you, and we hope to see you again at our next programs. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. Thank you.